So we've got the next 15 minutes or so for some questions and answers. I'd like to welcome all of this morning's speakers back up to the front. We've got some lovely chairs for you today, and there's a mic there as well. I believe there is also a roaming mic, perhaps, going around. We're going to go to the Mentimeter to see what some of the questions we have on the Mentimeter, and then I'll ask people if they can raise their hands if they have any other questions. Okay, so first question we have from the Mentimeter, it's actually for Mary. So Mary, in your presentation, you kind of mentioned the hospital, you had set up outdoor gyms within the hospital. So can I ask, how was that funded? And can you offer any advice in terms of how you've influenced prescribing as a first line product? Oh, there's a light.
Okay, brilliant. So 2 questions there. The first about how do you get funding to support alternative activities? I think I just borrow. I'm not going to say that I steal, but I beg a lot. And actually, people are very, very generous. So for each of those gyms, a large outdoor gym costs about £10,000. It's got a lifetime guarantee, 25-year guarantee. It's made in the UK. It's from sustainable materials, etc., etc. I mean, it's just such a brilliant thing. And for £10,000, it's like I'm always going around at this time of the year to see what people have got left in their budget. It's a great time of the year to get stuff done. So you just get quite good at begging for money, and I would get money from the big department stores, from organizations, basically just from anyone and everyone. And I tell stories about people like Claire, and about what a difference it can make. And often I bring patients with me when I'm going to do a presentation, if I'm going to a company or a business, especially if I'm going to a company who can provide these kind of activities and services that I want, then I go with my stories, with service users to make the case. And people want to do good. You know, they generally want to do the right thing and do something for their community. So a lot of the doors are open and they're ready for us to just walk on in. So I think just be a bit brazen and bold and just keep asking and you will receive. And the second question was about accessibility of treatments, wasn't it? So for me, I think the main thing with that was education of colleagues, because doctors, what I've recognized about them is that they generally want to prescribe medications for the shortest time possible. And of course, that's the right thing to do. But in the case of NRT, you have to do the opposite. You have to preload, which is what Claire was just saying and what I said to you earlier as well. Preload people before they come into a hospital. Practice with them when they come in. Give them lots of choice. Give them more and more and more. Who knows how much to give someone? If I'm smoking 20 a day when I come into your ward, how much nicotine replacement therapy should you give me? Oh, Kerry's got the answer. Yeah. So the answer is, for every cigarette I smoke, you're going to give me at least 2 milligrams of NRT. So there's something for you to all write down and take back. It's easy to remember that. If you're in an acute hospital, you replace each cigarette with 1 milligram of NRT. But in mental health services, we've got to be more generous. So the recommended guidance is 2 milligrams replacement for every cigarette. So it's quite easy to remember. So be really generous. Does that answer the question? So it's something for you to remember and take away.
Yeah. Thanks, Claire. And I think we've got a saying up here in the northeast, shy bairns getting out. So I think that's something we've got to take away from that. Next question we've got is for Claire. So Claire, in your opinion, how do we support people who have multiple dependencies and addiction, including tobacco? So rather than kind of looking at it in silo.
Yeah, it's on. Is it we on? I hate these things. Okay, so yeah, addictions, and it's such a hard thing. I think in an inpatient environment, we don't really provide addiction services, right? I work in acute wards. I work in mental health in the inpatient wards. So I know some of you in here are community-based. I think getting people into addiction services, but ultimately, do you know what? It's a choice. It has to come from me. You are never going to get me addiction-free unless I choose to be. You are never going to get me drug-free or drink-free unless I make that choice. Tobacco is the same. It has to be a choice. However, as much as the choice has to come from me, as services, you need to provide as many options as possible. It's not just about, oh, well, here's a box of patches. We'll see you in a week. Because it don't work. I put a patch on, I go home, and as soon as my mum rings, I'm like, I want a cigarette. Because it's those old neural pathways, right? It's old neural pathways that the brain creates as a coping mechanism. And I created those coping mechanisms for me at 13. So here I am now in my 40s, and my brain still does want to do the same thing, even though I know it's bad for me. I know it makes me feel physically unwell smoking. I know it makes me feel lethargic. I know it makes me feel all these horrible things that I don't feel when I'm smoke-free. But the only person who can ever get me smoke-free is me. And the problem is, when I'm acutely unwell, that becomes 10 times harder, which is where I need 10 times more support from you guys. Because I can't do it on my own when I'm really unwell. I've quit smoking loads of times. My God, it's ridiculous the amount of times I've quit smoking, right? But I can only ever do that on my own when I'm well. When I'm unwell, I need you guys to be like, right, okay, we need an admission. Get it to me before. Don't let me walk through the ward door and then, oh, what's that? You take my cigarettes and you lot, all the staff, wonder why I'm creating merry havoc. Well, of course I'm creating merry havoc. You've took my only coping mechanism away. A little bit of logic, a little bit of forethought, and lots of planning, and as many options as you can. And then once people are in your services, maybe look at additional services for addictions. Can you get people into CA, NA, AA, or whatever it is that works for them? Trusts do have addiction services that will come to inpatient environments or community environments. Take advantage of them.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, it is about that flexibility and that, additional support that you mentioned. But actually, I think we've also got to be better at communicating what our support offer is so that people can understand how flexible we can be and working with other services as well. Yeah,
mix it in. Like, if you don't tell people, I didn't know what NRT was out there. It wasn't until the nice dude in the chemist told me. I mean, he was really lovely. That first time I quit smoking, when I managed to quit for 3 years, he was great. He explained all my options. And then when they didn't, I went back and I was like, oh, that's not really working. He gave me something else. Keep giving people the options till they find something that works for them, because what works for me isn't going to work for you, and what works for you isn't going to work for you. Tailor it to the individual. You can't just generically help someone. It's got to be for that person.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I'm going to aim this one, I suppose, towards Rachel and Ruth. Are we going to be working with pre-assessment for planned inpatient stays to get NRT before admission? So I suppose that's kind of talking about the expanding the service offer.
We got asked this question in October for anyone who was here in October. And I guess the short answer is yes, that's the intention. But we need a number of things to be in place to be able to enable that to happen. But yeah, yes.
Can I come back to the previous question that Claire answered? You've got me thinking, saying about how do we deal with complex addictions as well as tobacco being in that mix, and it's definitely not something I've got the answers for, but I think sort of exactly as you've articulated, I can't top it from your experience, but from patients that I see, it's hard to know where to begin. You absolutely have to embed what Mary said about making it easier to not smoke than to smoke it and give you the full repertoire of resource. And although tobacco is probably the hardest of the addictions, it's also the one that we can really do something about. And for people who are struggling to trust health professionals or engage with services because of the way we commission them, if we start saying, look, we've got all these things you can have, they're free, try this, have incentives or vouchers, or it becomes the tool that brokers a relationship that can conquer the rest of those difficulties together. So it seems like a real enabler to me when patients are struggling with all of those things. Tobacco might be the hardest one, but it's definitely something we can do something about. So I think not lose sight of the support that we give for tobacco and all the principles that Mary outlined in her talk.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ruth. Was there any more questions on Menti? No? Okay, so I'm going to throw one and then I'll ask people to put your hands up. So we've heard a lot this morning kind of around the importance of not working in silo and about supporting people with SMI to quit smoking. It's not something that just happens over there in mental health services. Ruth, you were kind of explaining how actually it's everybody's responsibility. People with mental health conditions turn up at A&E. They're in our pregnancy services. They're in our community. I just wondered whether the speakers can offer some kind of reflection on why it's everyone's responsibility and how we can encourage people to take that responsibility up.
Can we go first?
I happen to have the microphone. Well, I feel like because tobacco dependence is the single most important reason why people with mental illness die young, and therefore for me it was really compelling for me then that I tried to find a way of making the biggest difference and having the biggest impact, the positive impact on people's lives. And so what I've come to realize now after the work that I've done, mostly originally in hospitals, and then I thought, actually, people with mental health problems, they don't just spend time in hospitals, thankfully. In fact, the majority of people with mental health problems are in our communities, so therefore I started to move my efforts into the community services. And nowadays, I spend most of my time now hanging out in food banks and baby banks, because I think that's where I find most people in my community with tobacco dependence. And so I think for me personally, I have to keep evolving and changing and moving, and I haven't stopped going into the hospital. I'm still in the hospital every Saturday morning running around the fields with the patients. But I spend more of my time now in the community and trying to weave my way into, and not being badged really as a healthcare professional who's got a solution, but who's somehow getting alongside people with the struggles that they're experiencing and talking to them about, how they're going to put food on the table or put the heating on this week, and being really interested to meet them at their level rather than saying I'm the expert and I've got the solutions. So I do think we've got to just kind of keep changing what we do and be open to conversation and listening, and then we will find the best way to keep going and moving forward. So, yeah.
Just to add to what Mary said, I think in public health and in health in general, we are confronted with many complex issues or conditions, but we know with tobacco it's kind of linear. If people stop smoking, their risk is reduced. And I feel that everybody can play a role. And actually, you see the results. So, if we're doing interventions around treating obesity, for instance, or increasing physical activity, or, you can name a condition, sometimes you actually can't see the impact of a weight management class or, an exercise class. But with tobacco and the interventions, you clearly see the impact, like as Claire has described, in people being physically healthier, mentally healthier, and everybody can play a role in that. So even if it's just very brief advice and you ask the question, or if you are right there in front of the person and you're offering support, being able to draw on the experience you have around, actually, have you thought of using a vape in addition to the NRT? Or do you know there's a class that you can go to and get additional support? And I think it's really important to do that, because going back to, I think it was either Ruth's slides around what health inequalities are, it's, preventable, avoidable. So it's actually something that is within our gift. And sometimes when you're working in health, you feel a bit powerless, like, I can't really do anything about it. You're just treating the person. But with tobacco dependency, we actually can do something about it. So that's what inspires me. That's what makes me think, when things are really challenging, I think, well, actually, I can make a difference and actually save a life. And so that's why I feel, if you put that at the back of your mind, actually, I'm going to be saving a life by having that conversation, then it gives a little bit more purpose and it gives you that strength to have those, difficult conversations.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I've just noticed the time and I don't want to eat into your coffee break anymore. So I'm going to bring the question and answers session to a close. The speakers are here all day, so I'm sure they wouldn't mind if over lunch or coffee, if you have a question, you can just grab them and have a lovely chat with them.